My sister-in-law smiled across the table and asked, in front of everyone, whether my 6-month-old son was actually my husband's. The table went silent. I looked back at her and asked the same question about her 8-month-old daughter. Her face went white before I had finished the sentence. What happened in the following 3 weeks dismantled her marriage, pulled a second family into the wreckage, and ended with her husband fighting for custody of a child who was not biologically his, because he had decided, after everything, that she was still his daughter in every way that mattered. Original post. My name is Claire. My husband Nick and I have a 6-month-old son named Mason, and for most of the time I have been part of Nick's family. His sister Jessica has been the person his mother Patricia organizes the world around. Not in a dramatic or obvious way, just in the accumulated way of families that have a favorite and have stopped noticing they have one. Nick was aware of it. He found it easier to work around than to name. I had been working around it for years. Jessica is 30, married to Tom, and they have a daughter named Emma who is 8 months old. Tom has red hair and pale freckled skin. Jessica has dark hair and olive skin. Emma has platinum blonde hair and striking blue eyes that belong to neither of them. When people commented on it at family gatherings, Jessica would laugh and say babies change, and most people accepted that because most people do not keep running the numbers. I had been running the numbers for several months before that Sunday dinner, and every time I ran them, they came out wrong in the same direction. The timeline had never quite held together. Emma was supposedly born in March, placing her conception in June of the previous year. I remembered Jessica posting photographs from a girl's trip to Cabo at the end of June, cocktails, a white bikini, a completely flat stomach. She had been posting from restaurants and social events through the months she was supposedly in her first trimester, claiming morning sickness to explain her absence from family gatherings. When she finally began showing, it seemed to happen rapidly, around month 7, which does not correspond to how pregnancies typically progress. Jessica never shared ultrasound images. She told people the doctor's office had a privacy policy about images, which I knew was not accurate. At Emma's baby shower, her college roommate Michelle made an offhand comment about how lucky it was that everything had worked out with the timing, then became visibly flustered when I asked what she meant and changed the subject immediately. I had been watching all of this accumulate without saying anything, partly because I did not yet have enough to say with certainty, and partly because raising questions about your sister-in-law's pregnancy in front of a family that considers her its center of gravity is not a small thing to do. I wanted to be sure before I was sure out loud. So I kept logging details and saying nothing, which was its own kind of waiting. Then Jessica leaned across the table at Sunday dinner and asked, with a specific smile, whether Mason was really Nick's baby, because he did not look anything like him. Nick nearly choked. Patricia dropped her fork. I looked at Jessica and asked whether Emma was really Tom's. The color left her face before I had finished asking. After dinner, while the men were in the living room and Patricia was cleaning up, I found Jessica in the kitchen loading the dishwasher with shaking hands. I told her that had been quite an accusation. She said she had been joking. I said I had been thinking about the timeline of her pregnancy. She slammed the dishwasher shut and turned around. I pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. I showed her the photograph from Cabo, June 25th, cocktail in hand, white bikini, visibly not pregnant. I told her that if Emma had been conceived in June as she claimed, that photograph should not exist. Jessica said she might have conceived later. I said there was another explanation, that Emma was not Tom's biological daughter, and that Jessica had questioned Mason's paternity that evening because she was already carrying guilt for exactly the thing she had tried to project onto me. Her hands found the counter behind her. I told her what I had put together. Tom traveled to Chicago on business almost every other week from May through July. During that same window, Jessica had been working late consistently on a campaign with a colleague from her marketing department. A man named David, tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, the same coloring Emma had inherited without explanation. Jessica told me I was delusional. Her eyes moved to the doorway. I showed her the hotel confirmation. A booking from the previous June at a hotel downtown, under David's name. I had found it when Jessica asked me to help locate an old email from Emma's pediatrician. She had left her account logged into my laptop and had never logged out. Then I showed her the text messages, screenshots I had taken from her phone months earlier when she had handed it to me to photograph Emma, a thread between her and David that included a message about missing their time together. She asked what kind of person went through someone's phone. I told her I had not gone looking. Once I noticed the first thing, the rest had presented itself. She grabbed the counter again. I gave her a moment with it, because there was nothing useful I could add to what the silence was already doing. The particular quality of that silence is something I have thought about since. It was not the silence of someone who had been falsely accused and was searching for a defense. It was the silence of someone who had known this conversation was coming for a long time and had simply run out of room to keep postponing it. I recognized it because I had watched Jessica be many things over the years: confident, dismissive, charming when she needed to be, and none of those versions of her produced that expression. That one was new. Then Tom's voice came from the doorway. He had been standing there long enough. His face was completely still as he asked what this was about David from marketing. Jessica lunged toward him and said I was making things up, that I had always been jealous of their family. Tom gently moved her hand from his arm and said he wanted to hear what I had to say. I told him he needed to ask Jessica about Emma's paternity, that the timeline did not hold. Tom's gaze moved to his wife. Jessica cried and said Emma was absolutely his daughter. Tom asked about the hotel receipts. I handed him my phone and watched him scroll through everything: the booking, the messages, the Cabo photographs. His face went pale. He asked Jessica when she had planned to tell him. She said there was nothing to tell. He asked whether a DNA test would settle it. The kitchen went completely silent. Patricia appeared in the doorway. Tom picked up Emma from the living room and told Jessica they were leaving. They had a great deal to talk about. Update 1. The drive home was quiet. Mason slept in his car seat. Nick drove with his hands tight on the wheel and eventually said I did not have to do it like that. I asked how I should have done it, given that Jessica had questioned our son's paternity in front of his entire family at a dinner table. He said he knew what she had done was wrong. He also said this was going to tear his family apart. I told him Jessica had done that. I was only in the kitchen. By Monday morning, Patricia had sent a series of increasingly hostile messages, the last of which said I had always been jealous of Jessica and she hoped I was happy now that I had destroyed her marriage. Jessica's messages swung between anger and desperation. The only person I had not heard from was Tom. Nick told me Jessica was refusing the DNA test. She was calling it an insult. Nick said Tom was demanding it anyway and staying at a hotel in the meantime. Patricia organized a family meeting that evening at her house. Nick went. When he came back after 10, he sat on the couch and stared at the ceiling for a long time before telling me that his mother had spent the entire meeting discussing how I had always had it out for Jessica and had finally found a way to hurt her. Jessica had spent it crying and insisting Emma was Tom's. Tom had not been there at all. I asked Nick if he had said anything in my defense. His silence told me everything I needed to know, and also confirmed something I had suspected for a while, that Nick loved me and also loved his family, and that when those two things came into direct conflict, he defaulted to going quiet rather than choosing. I understood it. I did not accept it as a permanent arrangement, and I told him so, but I understood it in the moment and did not push further that night because Mason needed feeding and we were both exhausted and some conversations require more than one sitting to finish properly. Over the next 2 days, Jessica's messages became more erratic. She wanted me to talk Tom out of demanding the test. She said it was insulting to their marriage. She said Emma was clearly Tom's and a test would only cause unnecessary pain. I did not respond to any of it. I had said what I had to say in the kitchen and I was not prepared to walk any of it back. 3 days later, Tom called while I was grocery shopping with Mason. He said Jessica had agreed to the test. They had done it the previous day. His voice was hollow in a way I recognized as someone who had already privately arrived at a conclusion they were waiting to have confirmed. I said I thought that was the right decision. He said he had not believed me at first. He had kept looking for alternative explanations: the trips to Chicago, the late nights, Emma's birthday. Then he had started running the dates himself. The results came back early. He texted and asked if we could meet. Update 2. Tom looked like he had not slept in several days when we met at a coffee shop near our street. His normally neat red hair was disordered and his eyes were bloodshot. He slid an envelope across the table. He was not Emma's biological father. Jessica had admitted everything after seeing the results. The affair had been with David. It had lasted nearly a year. David was married with children of his own. Tom said the worst part was what had happened after he confronted David at his office. David had initially denied everything. When Tom produced the test results, David's wife was present. She had been arriving for a lunch date. She heard the full conversation and threw her drink at her husband in front of his colleagues. Then David had told Tom he wanted to be part of his daughter's life. I asked what that meant. Tom said David was talking about custody rights. His lawyer had called Tom's lawyer the previous day. Tom looked at me across the table with his eyes wet and said he could lose Emma entirely, legally lose her to a man who had not known she existed until 4 days ago. I sat with that for a moment. The unfairness of it was almost physical. Tom had been present at the hospital the day Emma was born. He had done night shifts. He had learned which specific motion of the stroller made her stop crying on long walks. He had been to every appointment since the beginning, sitting in waiting rooms with a phone full of photographs and the particular pride of a new parent who cannot quite believe this small person exists. David had attended a conference in Seattle and a series of hotel rooms. The idea that a legal system might weigh those two things and arrive at an outcome that favored David over Tom was something I found difficult to sit with across a coffee shop table on a Tuesday morning. Tom said David was also claiming the relationship with Jessica had continued after Emma's birth, that they had still been meeting. Tom said he no longer knew what to believe about any of it. When I drove home, Nick was already there. He told me David's wife had called him directly. Jessica had apparently given her Nick's number. The wife wanted Nick to know that according to David, the affair had not ended with the DNA test. They had been together as recently as 2 weeks prior. We sat in the kitchen while Mason cooed from his playpen and the weight of all of it settled into the room. Update 3. Tom filed for divorce 3 weeks after the test results. I was at Jessica's apartment helping with Emma when the papers arrived by courier. Jessica stood in the doorway staring at the envelope for a long time before opening it. She said she had known it was coming. Seeing it in writing was different. She told me David's lawyer had called again. He wanted regular visitation. Tom was also pursuing partial custody. He had been Emma's father since birth, he said, and he was not prepared to surrender that because of a DNA result. Jessica said she had somehow created a situation where her daughter had 3 adults fighting over her and none of them were speaking to each other. I had no answer to that. Against all reasonable expectations, Patricia reinstated Sunday dinner. She called Nick and said the family needed to maintain its traditions. Nick thought it was a terrible idea. He went anyway because Patricia can be persuasive when she wants something, and she wanted this. The table was set with the good china, which Patricia brought out when she wanted the meal to communicate something beyond food. I had learned to read the china as a signal. It appeared at Christmas, at significant birthdays, and apparently now at family dinners held in the wreckage of a marriage that had publicly collapsed 3 weeks prior. The logic being that if the plates were fine enough, the occasion might still hold a shape resembling normal. Jessica arrived late, red-eyed, carrying Emma in an elaborate outfit I had not seen before, the kind of outfit that suggested Jessica had spent a portion of the previous night doing something with her hands that felt like control when nothing else did. Tom was already there, sitting in the living room making strained conversation with Nick about the football season. When Jessica walked in, the room went completely silent. Tom's eyes went to Emma immediately. His expression held love and pain in equal measure, in a combination that had no clean name. Jessica told him he could hold her. He stood and took Emma and she grabbed immediately for his face, a gesture she had apparently performed many times before. Tom's eyes filled. Patricia called us to the table. We arranged ourselves around it in a configuration that felt like a parody, Patricia at the head, Nick and me on one side, Jessica and Tom on the other with Emma in a high chair between them like separated parents at a child's birthday. Conversation was stilted and careful and almost entirely about nothing. The football season, Patricia's garden, the weather. Jessica set her fork down with a clatter and said she was tired of pretending. Patricia told her they were having a nice family dinner. Jessica looked around the table and said Tom was divorcing her, David was suing for paternity rights, and she had exposed her own affair to the entire family. Nothing about the situation was normal and she was done performing otherwise. Then she turned to me and said she owed me an apology. I almost choked. She said she had questioned Mason's paternity because she had been projecting her own guilt. She had been living a lie and had lashed out at me because I had what she had wanted, a family built on honesty. Her voice broke on the last sentence. She said she was sorry. The table was completely quiet. Nick found my hand under the table. I said thank you for saying it. It was all I had. Tom looked at his plate for a long time. Then he said he had been thinking about Emma. About what was best for her. He said he wanted to be her father. He had been her father from the beginning. DNA did not change that. He was still going to fight for partial custody and the divorce was still happening, but he was not giving up his daughter. Jessica was openly crying. Patricia made a sound of approval. Emma was mashing potatoes with her fist and appeared to find the whole situation entirely acceptable. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. As we were leaving, Jessica pulled me into the hallway and asked, quietly, if I could ever forgive her for what she had said about Mason. I told her I was working on it. That forgiving and forgetting were different things, and I had not confused them. Update 4. Tom's custody filing moved forward over the following weeks. David's lawyer was also filing, which meant Emma had 3 adults pursuing legal claims over her future simultaneously: her biological father, whom she had never met, the man who had raised her for 8 months and considered her his daughter in all the ways that registered to him as real, and her mother, who had started therapy and was, by the account of the therapist, finally engaging honestly with the consequences of what she had done. Nick and I talked about all of it on the drive home from that last Sunday dinner, Mason asleep in his car seat and the street lights passing in intervals outside the window. Nick said Tom's decision to fight for Emma surprised him. I said it hadn't surprised me at all. Tom had been present for every early morning feeding, every pediatrician appointment, every moment of the first 8 months of that child's life. The thing that defined fatherhood, for Tom, was not the biology, it was the accumulation of all those ordinary moments, and he was not interested in surrendering them because a test result told him he was allowed to. Nick asked me whether I would have exposed the secret if Jessica had not questioned Mason's paternity first. I thought about it carefully before answering. I told him yes, eventually. Not immediately, not at a dinner table, not like that. But the timeline was too wrong and the evidence had been sitting in plain view for too long, and the truth had the quality of something that was going to emerge one way or another regardless of whether I helped it along. Nick nodded slowly. He said he supposed that was the lesson, that secrets do not stay buried, they just wait, and they usually cause considerably more damage the longer they are kept. I looked back at Mason, still sleeping, entirely unaware of the months of family chaos he had been present for without understanding any of it. I thought about Jessica at her kitchen counter with shaking hands. I thought about Tom sliding a DNA result across a coffee shop table. I thought about Emma grabbing Tom's face at Sunday dinner with the easy familiarity of a child who knows whose arms she is in, without needing to know any of the rest of it. Families carry more than they show. The version of a family that appears at the dinner table with good china and careful conversation is almost never the whole picture, and the gap between the surface and the reality is where the damage accumulates, quietly, until someone accidentally names it in the wrong room at the wrong moment, and everything that had been holding the surface in place stops holding. What I did not expect, when I answered Jessica's question with the same question, was that telling the truth would produce anything resembling an ending. Endings require resolution and not much of this has resolved cleanly. Tom loves a child he did not father. David is pursuing rights over a daughter he did not know existed. Jessica is in therapy and making, by all available evidence, a genuine attempt at honesty for the first time in a long while. Patricia has accepted none of this and has resumed Sunday dinners as an act of institutional will. Nick and I are still standing. Mason is 7 months old and has started pulling himself to sitting, which he finds enormously satisfying and performs for an audience whenever possible. Whatever comes next for the rest of them, our foundation is not built on something that can be dissolved by a test result or surfaced by a conversation in a kitchen. That is not a small thing. It took watching its opposite up close for me to understand how much it was worth. Edit, for everyone asking whether I was wrong to say what I said in the kitchen that night. Jessica made a deliberate choice to publicly question my infant son's paternity at a family dinner, with a smile that told me she had been considering it before she said it. What I said in the kitchen afterward was a private conversation between the two of us. The fact that Tom overheard it was not something I planned, but I am also not able to construct a version of events in which Jessica deserved to continue keeping that secret. She had aimed at my son. I aimed back at the truth. Edit 2, for the people asking whether Tom was right to pursue custody given that Emma is not biologically his. I think that question answers itself once you spend 5 minutes with him. Tom is the person Emma has known as her father for every single day of her life. He is the person whose face she reaches for when she is held. Biology is relevant in a courtroom. In a house, at 7 in the morning, with a crying baby who needs someone to arrive, it is not the deciding factor. Tom arrived. Every time. Edit 3, for the people who said I should have gone to Tom privately before the dinner and never said anything at the table. I understand that argument. I also spent months watching Jessica's lie hold together and noticing that the only thing keeping it intact was that the people around her kept finding it easier to look away than to look directly. Sometimes the thing that breaks a lie open is not a private conversation. Sometimes it is a question answered with the same question, in front of everyone, at the wrong moment, and the fact that it was the wrong moment is exactly what made it impossible to dismiss. Edit 4, for everyone asking what I think happens with this family long term. I think Tom raises Emma, regardless of what any court document says, because he has already decided that is what he is doing and Tom is not a man who reverses decisions of that kind. I think David eventually understands that winning a legal argument about parental rights and being a father to a child are not the same thing, and that Emma will eventually be old enough to draw her own conclusions about both of them. I think Jessica is in the process of becoming someone more honest than she has been, and that the process is painful in a way she did not expect, and that this is probably the correct outcome. I think Patricia will continue setting the table with good china and calling it family. And I think Nick and I will keep showing up to some of those dinners, and skipping others, and building our own life around Mason in the space that exists between obligation and choice. That space turns out to be larger than I expected. We have been doing well in it.